My parents were replaced by imposters.
Psychologist here. The creepiest mental condition happens to be the one I specialize in. Capra's delusion. This is when one person holds the delusion that somebody close to them, whether it be a spouse, friend, parent, potentially even animals, has been replaced by an identical imposter. One of the craziest cases I've come across was a boy who is 15 years old, believes his parents have been replaced. Now, this boy was abused growing up, which led to some other conditions he likely had, that went undiagnosed. This case was one that I'll never forget because he also had voices in his head, so on top of believing his parents had been replaced, he heard voices. Now, unlike the movies, the voices were not very often. He would hear things maybe once or twice a week. Most of the time they were not saying anything bad. Sayings like, "How were your day? We should get ice cream. It's beautiful outside." Where it became concerning, as I'm working with a 15-year-old boy, but he's hearing these voices in an older woman's voice. However, we believe Capra's delusion triggered something. This is when the voice became more aggressive. Imagine a 15-year-old boy truly believe in his core that his parents are not who they say they are, while at the same time, having a voice inside your head tells you not to go to sleep. But if you fall asleep, they might do something. Could you imagine how terrifying that is for a 15-year-old? At this point, I've worked with him for several months, and I began to suspect he wasn't telling me everything. They were questions I'd ask where he would sit there quietly, and he would look down as almost to say there is something else, but I was never able to get it out of him. We had a meeting scheduled for Wednesday at 10 a.m., and he never showed up. This was not completely uncommon, but it wasn't until I went home that night and turned the news on, and I was in horror. On the news, a 15-year-old boy reportedly killed both his parents. While the cops were dragging him out of the house, he was screaming, "I had to do it. They gave me no choice. Now my parents can come back."
Home intruder or mental disorder?
As a psychologist, one of the scariest, creepiest mental disorders was the case I worked years ago, which was schizophrenia. This case of schizophrenia dealt specifically with the client seeing people that weren't there. Imagine waking up to a man standing in the corner of your apartment, and you don't know if they're real or not. The client I've been working with for several years seemed to show signs of progress. They hadn't seen anybody that they did not believe were real people for months at this point. The morning of my meeting, went into my office and I saw him sitting there, and he looked distressed. I knew instantly something was wrong. He said it happened again. He woken up middle of the night and had a schizophrenic attack. He described walking into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and when he closed the door on his fridge, he could see a man standing there. He began to describe the man as overweight, his stomach hanging out at the end of his shirt, thick glasses and rotting teeth. He said it was so vivid, unlike the other episodes. He slowly walked closer and closer to the man, to the point where he got close enough to smell his bad breath and look him straight in the eyes, and all the man did was stand there. He looked at the man and said out loud, "This can't be real." With the man replied, "This is real," and then he began to touch himself inappropriately. He closed his eyes and went back to his bedroom. We worked through this with him to make sure he understood this wasn't real, and this was just another episode. The unfortunate side of it is when he went home, his place was absolutely torn apart. He was missing money, his TV and some valuables. However, there was a note left for him that said, "This is real."
Goodbye, fingernails.
Not a psychologist, but I feel the story is one that needs to be told. My former husband began to develop schizophrenia almost 12 years after being married. Schizophrenia is one of those ones we don't know how to diagnose well, and they can be different symptoms for everybody. I got to the point where I was coming home and I didn't know who I was coming home to. Some days I had a loving, kind, caring man that I married. Other days I'd come home to an abusive, violent, angry man who believed I was out to get them. No, I hadn't lost my husband overnight. He still had all his memories. From what I could tell, he just had a hard time deciphering what was real and what wasn't. I can tell you still loved me, but I could also tell that he was worried about what he would do to me. They were multiple times. He beat me one time, actually put me in the hospital, and was shortly after that I believe he began to feel he wasn't in control. We did the wrong thing by keeping it between us and not seeking help. So things only got worse. One day I came home, my husband knocked me out. I woke up in the garage with a sock in my mouth, my hands tied around the chair. To me, the most scariest part was that the garage was covered in sarin wrap. Kind of like Dexter Morgan, if you've ever seen the show. He beat me. He cut off part of my ear. He pulled out toenails and fingernails. All because he thought I was part of the government and I was coming to get him. He left me there, and I guess when he woke up the next day he had a moment of clarity. I could see when he came into the garage he looked terrified of what he had done. He untied me, and we sat there just crying on the floor. I knew we had to get help. He knew we had to get help. I cleaned myself up and told him I had to go grab some more bandages from the store. When I got home I found my husband had taken a shotgun to himself. I lost a man I loved that day, and for almost a month after I would find little pieces of his brain and his skull in the carpet. Please, if you're reading this, and someone close to you is going through this as well, get help.